Hi everyone, my name is George Aguiar. I work for the Reindeer Research Program as a researcher. For this next part of the class, we're going to talk about captive ungulates in Alaska. We're going to start off with captive elk and how these animals got to the state, and get into a little bit about what's being done with them now from the producers, from the producer themselves. So I'd like to start by talking about captive elk and Bill Ward and his wife Marcia, which were instrumental in bringing them to Alaska. Legislation from Alaska's senator at the time, Jack Coghill, initially authorized elk ownership in Alaska in the late 1980s. Bill Ward and his wife were in the beef industry, and they were looking to spread out their investments, spread out the risk, and elk looked very promising at the time. Bill had been to agriculture conferences and began initiating the process with Division of Agriculture and Fish and Game. Early 1990s, he obtained his elk ownership license from Fish and Game with the help of Division of Wildlife Conservation Director Wayne Raglan. And Bill had done some work with moose with him, so he already knew him. It worked out. It worked out fairly smoothly when talking with them. And Bill, he was sensitive to their concerns. This was something new in the state, importing elk. So he built the fence first, and the Division of Agriculture did the inspection. He made sure everything was up to compliance. He had it all in place, and he was ready to go. So his first group of animals came from the Falls, Montana area. He brought in 20 yearlings, 10 bulls, and 10 heifers. The trailer was sealed through Canada and only allowing access for food and water. The state vet checked him on the Alaska side, and in total he made 2 trips, bringing up his 20 animals. Soon after that, he brought a 3-year-old bull from the same place to breed heifers as 2-year-olds to increase his genetic diversity. Bill was one of the founders of the North American Elk Breeders Association. 20 people, each threw in $3,000 to $5,000 apiece, and that was the beginning of this very large organization that specializes in providing support for elk producers throughout North America. The organization was split in the next 3 years, and Bill explains this struggle where part of the elk herders were, like himself, looking to spread out their investment and diversify, and were more rancher type, and they could see the value in the long term with the meat production. And the other side was this the show animals, the trophy animals, and kind of wanting to make a big splash and make top money fast. And he discusses how that became kind of a fork in the road. 2 years later, Bill went to the Yukon Territory, Canada, to pick up a couple more young stock, once again for genetic diversity. And he discusses, the Rocky Mountain type are mostly what people have behind fence up in Alaska. They could have been Manitoban, which carries on from the plains. The various subspecies, Manitoban versus Rocky Mountain versus Roosevelt, body size, antler size. You could look on your further readings to get a little more information on that. He talked about Roosevelt elk being imported in the 1920s, but not as a fenced animal. He also discussed 2 people that were very important in getting elk into Alaska. Danny and Uli Nolan. There were many elk in Alberta. Alberta and the Yukon were looking into transplanting elk into the Yukon. And so when they did that, they brought up animals. The herd was split, and Danny and Uli got half of them, and then the other half went free range. And of the elk that are in Alaska now, many of them came from there. The longer Bill was in the elk business, the more he saw testing protocols, tightening up for importing animals. And so eventually he did get his herd tested, and his herd peaked at 175 animals, and he ended up providing seed stock for many of the elk farmers in Alaska at the current time. Elk went out to the Hollenbecks in Delta Junction, Northern Lights Elk Ranch in Matanuska Valley, owned by Delbert and Jackie Simino, Scott Miller in Delta Junction, Smythe in Kenai, and animals even went to Kodiak. Early to mid-90s, Ward was still in Kenai and the velvet industry was coming to a halt. Bill Ward and his wife moved to Delta in 1999 with their elk. There was a potential for the hunting aspect. There was a potential for the hunting aspect. If Bill could maximize antler production, these animals as trophies were worth 2 to 3 times as much as they were as carcasses. In 2005, Bill Ward decided it was time to get out of the elk business. He was pushing carrying capacity. He realized to do this thing right, he was going to need to purchase more land, more infrastructure, and it was time to move on. He sold the elk to Randy Woods and reconverted to hay production. To end my interview with Bill Ward, he had a couple of passing comments that he wanted people to definitely take note of. One of them was the dangers of bottle feeding elk, and how they are nasty animals when bottle fed. Particularly talking about the bulls, and the danger of elk to people when they come of age. And he also discussed, his take-home message was 3 things to remember when getting involved into elk farming. The capital investment is high. You're going to have to put a lot out there. The long-term investment is valid. And just be ready to be under a microscope, both publicly and regulatory. Animal welfare standards, politics. If you are going to do this thing, just from the get-go, understand that you are going to be looked at. He was very adamant that people need to realize that if getting into elk production. I had mentioned Jackie and Delbert Simino of Northern Lights Elk Ranch earlier. I did have a chance to interview them as well, and I have been to their ranch also. They originally purchased 15 animals from Bill Ward in 1996. One of the discussions that Delbert and I had that I would like to highlight is this one about artificial insemination and how he uses it to maximize production. He feels very strongly about using this tool, and he's one of the few, if not only, actually doing this with elk in Alaska. I also had a chance to interview Scott Hollenbeck of Alaska Interior Game Ranch Incorporated in Delta Junction. And Scott talked about how he purchased stock from Bill Ward and Ford Elk Farms in Whitehorse, Yukon. He carries about 90 elk. He started with a handful of them. And one of his big things is elk hunts. People come from all over the place. They stay there. They are involved in everything from shooting the animal all the way to taking their meat away. He runs elk and bison together and on several thousand acres. So to close, I would just like to say that these animals can be successfully raised behind fence. However, they are not truly domesticated. They have not evolved to rely on people for survival and to thrive.